Thanks, Julio. Before Matt comes up here, I want to say that we gave Matt a little bit different instruction than we gave others. So tonight, we chose, for the most part, to not celebrate particular individuals, but really to celebrate all of us and to understand it takes all of us to get this work done. But this year is the final year of Karen Sanchez-Epler's time as the faculty advisor for the Center for Community Engagement. The CCE, honestly, would be nowhere without Karen. She has given us so much that I'm not sure words can even describe what she's done. Most of all, Karen has given generously and unstintingly of her time. And I think you all know there's actually no more precious resource than time. Karen has come to every single one of our staff meetings, and we meet weekly, 2 hours at a time. She's come to all of our activities, she offers advice, she helps us organize faculty, she connects with students. Karen knows all the community organizations in the Pioneer Valley, so really there's no aspect of our work that Karen doesn't know. Karen has opened her home to us and has created settings in which faculty, staff, and students get together to share meals in a way that sadly actually doesn't happen often enough here. So Karen, we really want to thank you for your 3 years. We don't know how we'll function without you, although we're eager to welcome Professor Kristen Buemiller to the next faculty advisor to the CCE, but still we will miss you. So as we thought about asking an alumnus to come talk about faculty, we said, let's find somebody for whom Karen Sanchez-Epler really made a difference, and let's ask him to come tell his story. So Matt, come on up.
Thank you for allowing me the privilege of speaking on behalf of Professor Sanchez-Epler, and thus on behalf of all of the good and great members of the Amherst College faculty who have nurtured and encouraged my sense of civic responsibility through their teaching and example. I may question my deservingness of this privilege. I may question how well I have exemplified their ideals of teaching and scholarship, but let there be no mistaking my satisfaction at having the privilege to myself. To address the extent of my debt to Professor Sanchez-Epler would be far too large an undertaking for such a small speech. So I'll focus instead on how one moment of generosity, and indeed genius, on her part, inspired me to become a teacher. The moment itself occurred, as do most of the best teaching moments, outside of the classroom. In fact, it occurred after I had graduated from Amherst, 1 week after, to be exact. A paper that I had written for Professor Sanchez-Epler's seminar on American childhood was being published by a literary journal, and I was scheduled to be on a panel at the American Literature Association conference at the Westin in Copley Square. Having fallen short, I cringe to admit, of nearly every honor that can be granted to a graduating senior, this was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my 4 years at Amherst. I was 22, about to deliver a paper on Steinbeck alongside a panel of experts, and to a crowd of accomplished scholars of American literature. It was this last element, though, the crowd, that set the occasion tumbling short of my dreams. First of all, crowd seems hardly the right word. At high water mark, there were perhaps 10 people in the room, 3 of whom were immediate family members, 1 of whom was my girlfriend. Even one of the panelists had failed to turn up. I couldn't blame Steinbeck for the sparse attendance. East of Eden had just a few years earlier sold more than 1 million copies as the novel that brought back Oprah's Book of the Month Club. It occurs to me now that perhaps I could blame Oprah. At the instant that I took to the podium to begin, the door crept open to admit one last auditor. To my surprise, Professor Sanchez-Epler. And just like that, the empty seats became for me a crowd, perhaps not the crowd that I had been looking for in all my vanity, but the crowd that I knew at bottom that I wanted. As I began reading, however, I noticed that Professor Sanchez-Epler was fussing about in her purse. I looked on incredulously as she began, of all things, to knit. Which I think if you take a look now is being repeated. But now that she's done it to Professor Cobham Sander, I don't feel like I'm so marginalized. She knit directly through my reading without once looking up. Through the next reading, and then through the last. I can't honestly claim that anybody in the audience was particularly riveted while I was reading, but knitting? My paper couldn't have been that bad. You may recall that I mentioned that a panelist had failed to show up. Well, that panelist was, I discovered, the convener, responsible for relating each paper to the next to create a thematic or methodological whole. In other words, to unify the three panelists' remarks. In the absence of this convener, silence had descended upon the gathering. There seemed to me a yawning, unbridgeable chasm between each of the three papers. There wasn't a word that I could find to link them. As the panel began to fade into a despondent inertia, Professor Sanchez-Epler, without looking up from her knitting, began to knit each of the panelists' papers together with eloquence and her trademark clarity of thought until they were woven seamlessly by what now appeared an unmistakable common thread. It was brilliant. It was a miracle of synthesis. But my point is not merely that Professor Sanchez-Epler saved the day. It is highly debatable whether the day, the panel, was even worth saving. My point is that that day I came into a dramatic awareness of the fact that someone with critical and intellectual gifts in such spectacular abundance took my work seriously. If she took it seriously, someone who could link so eloquently and credibly the seemingly unlinkable, who was I not to take it seriously? If it was her opinion that I had potential as a scholar, what qualified me to disagree? It would have been easy to have chosen any number of anecdotes about Professor Sanchez-Epler, how she baked Dickinson's recipes for her classes each Wednesday in the spring, or how we were invited so often to her home on South Pleasant Street. But it was this moment at my first scholarly engagement, my God, to think of the wonderful, interesting panels that she had skipped to attend mine, that taught me just how much power a teacher has to inspire confidence in a student. Whatever course she was teaching, and I rarely missed an opportunity to enroll, I never felt that she was teaching English or American studies, Dickinson, childhood, New York City. I felt that she was teaching me. I've often wondered how I might repay Professor Sanchez-Epler for all that she gave me as undergraduate. In the end, I'm not sure that I can, other than to promise that I will reciprocate her generous and humane ideals of teaching in my own classroom. Professor Sanchez-Epler has given me many gifts, but she is not aware of the best gift that she has given me. A month ago, a former student of mine from a former school wrote graciously to thank me for teaching his sophomore English class. He wrote, "For many of us, it was the first time we felt we were being treated like equals by a teacher." A Wellesley High School student wrote that note, but it's just as true that Professor Sanchez-Epler gave it to me. I suppose self-belief is what the teacher stands uniquely poised to give the student. Like so many of the exemplary teacher-scholars that I encountered at Amherst as an undergraduate, Professor Sanchez-Epler encouraged my sense of civic interest and responsibility by nurturing first my belief in my own value and ability. In preparing for this speech, I took up the unenviable task of rereading my Amherst senior thesis in American Studies, the one that Professor Sanchez-Epler supervised. There's not a passage in there from which any reasonable human being could derive any pride, except for this one at the end of my acknowledgments. My greatest debt is to my advisor and mentor, Professor Karen Sanchez-Epler. Having encouraged this topic since its genesis almost 15 months ago, she has served thereafter as the mediator of my enthusiasms, my sentimentalities, even my occasional spells of despair. To her I am, and shall always be, in the kind of unrepayable debt that is unique to one who has inspired another to pursue a vocation. Thank you, and thank you.